Good afternoon and welcome to New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. John is on assignment this week at Disney World. I'm your host, Bart Fromuth, and this is my friend and fellow state rep, Keith Ammon. As you know, I'm from Bedford, next door, and then so is Keith over in New Boston. He also represents Milford and
Hollis and Mount Vernon.
Excellent.
Yep, four towns. Yep.
So 4 towns. So a little heavy lifting on your end. How many constituents is that for you?
It's about 40,000 voters, something like that. Yeah, it's a floaterial leftover district. It's an overlay district. So,
all right.
Yeah.
We've got about I think I've got 22,000.
Yeah, it's big
in Bedford. So anyway, we're here with you this week, and we certainly miss John, but he'll be back with us next week. I was thinking about for topics this week, we could kind of take a look at number one, as we always talk about, really touching base with where the presidential races are, what's going on up at the State House, and then just trying to decipher the craziness of what has become U.S. politics as of late. So
yeah, this year has been very strange.
Yes.
The last, this cycle has been really odd.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, we'll jump right into it. I mean, Trump is still now, here we are in it's basically April. I think, what's today, the 30th of March?
31st, yeah.
So Trump still has a lead in the polls. He's still winning the delegate count for the Republican primary, and looks like he's going to be pretty damn close to capturing all the delegates needed to capture the nomination. So if he wins New York by 50%, that could swing it for him, as could Wisconsin. So
well, he'll be right on the bubble. I think Ted Cruz is at 10 points ahead of him in Wisconsin at this point. So
it'll be close.
There is some doubt that it might be what they call a brokered convention.
Yep.
Which means, I forget what the magic number is. Something like 1,275.
1230, 12, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah. But what's kind of interesting, a couple of years ago, Ron Paul ran for office, and he got a minority of the delegates, but a good chunk of delegates. And they put in this rule. It's called the 8-state rule. They put it in place to stop another Ron Paul from coming forward. It means you have to win 8 states if you're going to be nominated on the floor of the convention. And that rule is in place, and now it's causing them trouble with Trump. So that rule is coming back to bite them, and there's if it is a brokered convention, that rule's in place, they're going to have to scramble and remove it so that, Kasich or Cruz could be nominated. Because I don't think Cruz has won 8 states yet.
I'm not sure. He's going to be close. Obviously, Kasich only has the one victory in his home state of Ohio.
Yeah, Cruz got some delegates in proportionate states where it's not a winner take all.
Yeah, he had some very, very close finishes for second. I think that has his delegate count up. And then Rubio is refusing to give up the 190 or so delegates that he.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
He had but New York, if you get over 50% of the vote in the primary in New York, you win. It's a winner takes all, and so that's playing a major role in terms of the mathematics looking favorable for Donald to get to the convention with the requisite number to win outright. He's got like a 54% to 20% lead, I think, against Cruz right now. So it'll be interesting to see. And then the Democrat primary, which I had personally given up for dead about 3 or 4 weeks ago, after Clinton had that. It was like not Super Tuesday. I think it was the following Tuesday that she had kind of run the map on him. Mm-hmm. But then he had big victories in Washington, Hawaii, Alaska, and all of a sudden he's gaining some of his mojo back.
Yeah, he's nipping at her heels in states, but the Democratic Party has that whole superdelegate process, and the superdelegates are elected officials.
Yep.
And there's a whole bunch of them, a couple hundred of them, and they've all come out. Most of them have come out for Hillary. So if Bernie's going to win, if he has any chance to win the Democratic nomination, he has to convince a lot of those superdelegates to switch sides, and I doubt many are going to do it. But it could disenfranchise a lot of voters, because the people have spoken that Bernie is a close second or maybe the first choice, but because of the superdelegate situation, their votes don't count. So if I was a Bernie Sanders supporter and the superdelegates decided for Hillary, I'd feel pretty disenfranchised. Like, why run a national campaign if a few select people get to decide the race?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm obviously sympathetic to that line of thinking where you let the voters decide in the primaries. But in talking with some of my friends on the Democrat side as well as the Republican side, one of the arguments that's put forth by the establishment in both parties is that this isn't democracy at play. These are private political parties, and we at the top, not you and I, but we as in the royal we, the decision-making we, either Democrat or Republican, are tasked with coming up with the best candidate to win the election. And so they're saying that we want input from the voters,
sure,
but that input alone is not input, i.e. the vote, is not decisive.
Well, it's like a veneer of democracy laid on top of these two private,
correct,
who have a duopoly over the whole system.
Correct.
We only have two parties. China has one party, right? So
we're only slightly better off. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. But this is an anti-establishment year, like big time. You know, Trump and Bernie, the political class is scared because the DC Beltway, there's a lot of fairly well-off people who make their living off of government, and if the whole apple cart gets overturned, that's what they're afraid of. So it's very interesting.
Are you a big believer in the idea that there's such a thing as a professional or expert politician? Because that's another thing that we hear from proponents of the party kind of oligarchy. Is that, well, these people know what they're doing, they've been in power for a long period of time, they know how to run a country, they know how to run a district, so on and so forth.
A governor's better than a first-term senator, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly, or an upstart that hasn't been involved in the political process at all. And basically, the experience kind of lends them to knowing what's best for the rest of us.
I think there's a consultant class. There's people that make their living being consultants and engineering candidacies.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are way below that level. Maybe one day, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe.
But I think you could easily get swept up into, you become the figurehead, and there's a whole machine that kind of develops around you, and you have, they'll tell you what to say and where to stand and where to be, and I think that's really where the power resides.
Well, it's interesting too, because it's not the first time I've heard the whole professional politician, the expert politician.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a team behind them, is the point.
Well, and I get that, but I think, and I've heard it too from my friends over in the Massachusetts legislature. When I'll rib a few of them at the fact that they make an obscene amount of money.
It was like 80 grand or something.
Well, for a House rep, it's like 75 plus a staff of like 6 or 7.
Wow, that would be nice.
Plus pension, plus healthcare.
I get a box to put my mail in and a little slot behind the seat in front of me.
Well, the argument when we were ribbing each other, about like I always talk about, the biggest waste in the state of Massachusetts is how much they pay the people to screw the state up. And they fire back and say, well, you people up in New Hampshire just have a whole bunch of novice amateurs who don't know what you're doing, and when you don't pay your politicians, you get New Hampshire. I kind of feel though, overall, if you take a look at the difference between New Hampshire and the professional class in Massachusetts or New York or so on and so forth. Number one, we have a lot less like actual political corruption. Where how many times do you see the Speaker of the House in Massachusetts or California or New York go to jail?
Yeah.
But yet New Hampshire, you don't. Do I feel like I'm at my desk 1 hour and then I'm running up to go and take some votes up in Concord, then I'm back at my desk later? Yeah, absolutely. But that I kind of feel like you and I and the other 400 kind of embody like the true meaning of a citizen legislature.
Yeah, there's warts, on the system, but it's not perfect. But when you think about representative democracy, we don't live in a democracy. We live in a representative democracy, right? It's not a true democracy. So we elect representatives to go take votes for us on our behalf, and if we don't like how they voted, we vote them out.
Right.
In theory, that's how it's supposed to work.
Right.
But let's say the value of your vote in Bedford, voting for the selectmen or the school board, is one of, you said 40,000 or however.
20,000. Yep.
20,000. However that number is, your vote is a fraction of that, and it counts a lot more at your local level than it does, say, in a presidential race, where your vote is one of 300 million.
Right.
So I think it makes sense, if you have a few highly paid professional politicians who represent a huge number of voters, as opposed to 400 amateurs that represent 3,500 voters. Our vote actually counts more. We get a more granular level of representation in New Hampshire than we do in other states, like California. Some states it takes you 6 hours to drive to the Capitol, and
right. It's almost like, for a state that size, it's pretty much like you might as well have an office in D.C. and just
And
you
stay
know
there.
you're back in your hometown maybe once every couple of weeks.
Yeah. So I think it's cool. I think our votes as voters count more because there's fewer people being represented by each of the 400 legislators.
Do you think, in terms of how things operate, up in Concord, and we look at examples across the country, I mean, I personally don't feel as though, geez, if I had some experience up here, or if we got paid, I could make this my full-time job. Like we'd be the state would be so much better off. Like I almost kind of feel like, because we represent, I think we're more representative of the populace than in other states. I kind of feel like the debates that take place are very much debates that you would see take place like kind of out on the street, at the water cooler in the office type of a thing.
Right. The trestle in town or something, right?
I have no doubt it's probably harder for lobbyists to get their agenda passed in New Hampshire, but that doesn't, I don't know,
Well,
it doesn't really speak to me as...
You can see how the lobbyists work. I mean, they work through the committees because there's only 20 at the most on the committee. So the lobbyists put their pressure on the committees, and then the committee recommendation goes to the House. And then when it's in the full House, they don't really do much.
It's kind of like out of their hands.
Yeah, there's too many people to lobby.
Yeah.
But then when it goes to the Senate, there's only 24, and then they swoop back in.
Well, it's funny that the system's that way, because actually
Yeah.
New Hampshire Senate is one of the smallest, if not maybe the smallest in the country. So on the one hand, the House, the largest in the country, and then the Senate, the smallest. So it's interesting to see kind of how that dynamic plays out. But I don't know. I kind of feel as though we probably do a pretty good job, and New Hampshire has some of the liberties and freedoms I think that a lot of other states don't have as a result of us not being up there for the full year.
Yeah, and is that because people are freedom-minded in the state and they really want to preserve those freedoms, or is it because the government is just so slow and inefficient that it's hard to get all the wonderful new laws passed that other states have done?
That's an interesting question. I'd like to think it's because the representatives and the people as a whole are kind of minded, towards
I hope, yeah.
limited government. But it's an excellent question, because we are a slow-moving animal, and we're only up there like 6 months every 2 years, 7 months every 2 years, really. If you look at
parts
when we're
of,
really up there doing battle. But that's an interesting observation. But it works for us there. But so I mean, what are your thoughts on getting back to the presidential race? Now, one thing that I've kind of gone and been amazed with is how this year seems to be so kind of disconnected from voting for that person that exactly kind of meets your criteria, your needs, and it's more kind of like, as you pointed out earlier, it's like non-establishment versus that establishment class. It's just people don't seem to care what vehicle they use to dethrone the current kings and queens, as long as that vehicle is successful.
Yeah, I mean, this would be my assessment. I am a Republican, but on the Democratic side, it seems like Bernie's the outsider, Hillary is the establishment class. But in the Republican side, Trump and Cruz are both outsiders. Kasich is kind of an outsider, but he's more, he doesn't seem like, he doesn't seem fully embraced by the establishment. But the establishment candidates, Jeb, maybe Lindsey Graham, Rubio, right? They fell by the way. They dropped like flies, So it's a really interesting race. I think this is going to be a historic, election year. It's going to be a new chapter in American politics, and for the better or worse, I don't know. It seems like the civility, when people are posting pictures of each other's wives in bikinis, and and that's the level of discourse that we have now at the national level. Like, I don't know what's coming after that.
I mean, to that point, it has been kind of, it's been a very zoo-like culture, I think. Circus act almost, kind of on the Republican side. The Democrats have actually been somewhat more tame in comparison. It'd be interesting to see, if let's say Hillary wins, because she's like kind of the only establishment figure left that has a chance to obviously succeed. She's ahead of the primary right now for the Democrats, and the polling shows that she's likely going to defeat Donald in the general.
I think just kind of mirroring what's in our state house political landscape, I think there are enough Republicans that have been in power that would rather see Hillary win than a Cruz or a Trump. I think there's enough of them.
I would agree.
They privately think that.
I would agree. But my question though is if Hillary wins and if this anti-establishment backlash ultimately proves unsuccessful in the 2016 campaign, do you think it dies on the vine, or do you think it actually comes back even more ferocious, perhaps, in 2018 and 2020? I tend to think if Trump wins or Sanders wins, we get it out of our system, and then it turns out to be nothing like what people had hoped for, and we probably just run back to the folks that have been leading the slow burn rather than the fast burn, so to speak. I think if Trump wins, he's probably not president again in 4 years, and I think the same is true for Sanders. People have kind of gotten out of the system, and we're gonna have a lot of new voters, I think, this cycle than we've had, and I think this is probably going to set a record for
people coming in
for turnout.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see, but I think if Hillary wins, I think that the fervor comes back even stronger and more widespread the next time around, because the options that we have are so like crappy for the real political junkies that are like looking for, all right, I want change, but I don't want like bombastic, out of control, take me and just spin the top and see where we end up type of a change.
Yeah, nukes for Pakistan or for Japan.
So it'll be interesting to see. So but we can talk about more about that in the second half of the show. During the intermission, John has asked that we actually show you a few of his photographs from him and Phyllis down in Disney World. So without further ado, take a look at the little montage he's put together, and then we'll be back with you in a few minutes. Welcome back. Hopefully you've enjoyed the very short montage that John put together with the Tarzan photo and the Dunkin' Donuts and over at Universal Studios. But he had one of him and Phyllis on I think it was Splash Mountain, but he chose not to
oh, really?
To include that. So
Say hi to Mickey Mouse, John.
Yeah. I went on Splash Mountain about 10 years ago, and I actually got really scared.
Really?
I'm not good at roller coasters.
Really?
I don't handle myself well.
You get vertigo, like you get dizzy?
I just get really scared. And,
really?
Yeah.
We have to go on some roller coasters.
Yeah, well, they always take those photos that are waiting for you, like to pay like $50 for it. And I was like white knuckled. Like I probably thank God they couldn't capture the high pitched scream. But, so anyway, John had a good one, but he posted on Facebook and chose not to share with the viewers of Goffstown. So hopefully next time he'll integrate that into the show. But so getting back to the presidential election, I mean, one of the things too that it kind of stood out this time around for me, because obviously both of us were Rand Paul people. We've told the viewers that in the past, that we were early endorsements for Rand. And my following for Rand, and I don't know about yourself, but really was kind of grew out of my affection for his father. Kind of, there's stuff that I don't really agree with Rand, but I figured if he was raised at Ron's table, then a lot of that probably wore off on him. And but I kind of wonder now, looking at the state of this election and seeing how poorly Rand did in a Ron Paul bastion like New Hampshire, and I wonder, was there really this like libertarian wing movement that took place in 2012, or was that really just kind of like the embers of the anti-establishment movement we're seeing now? Because for Rand to have only gotten, I think, like 6% after his father did 25% in this state, with a healthy second place in a somewhat crowded field at that time. makes me wonder about that wing of the party, and was that a libertarian movement, movement towards smaller government, or was that just the origination of people just against the GOP elite?
Yeah, I guess there's only a very small number of people that would identify as libertarians, and libertarians tend to be kind of purists by nature. So like they'll eat their own. Like if I say gas taxes are a user fee, and you say no, they're not, then we'll argue about some minuscule thing, and then we won't be friends anymore. Like that seems like what libertarians do.
And then bored everybody else that was listening to us.
Yeah, exactly. But I think like Ron Paul, if you go back in history, recent history, he really started the Tea Party movement. His following, he's considered the godfather of the Tea Party movement. And I think it was in 2007 where they reenacted the Boston Tea Party, and that really sparked the Tea Party movement. That's where the term came from. And then Rick Santelli on CNBC.
Yeah, on CNBC.
A lot of people give him the credit, but that was after. He was sort of a Ron Paul fan.
Yep.
But the Tea Party movement blew up. It was huge, right? It was huge for a long time. But it was leaderless, rudderless. You saw Glenn Beck go down and try to co-opt it.
Yep.
So all these, figureheads try to co-opt it. And then it kind of fizzled, and then it was like a pejorative term to be a Tea Partier. And then you saw the bank bailouts with Wall Street, and that's where Occupy Wall Street started up, right?
Right.
Because one of Ron Paul's, one of the things that he's kind of added to the popular discourse is the fact that the Federal Reserve isn't part of the government. It's a private bank,
right? And
it prints the money, and that's where inflation comes from. And inflation is a hidden tax, right?
Right.
And Wall Street benefits from that. They get bigger and bigger because they get to spend the new money first. And then Occupy Wall Street blew up, and they were camping in Wall Street. You remember all the protests?
Oh yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting. A few years later, the Bernie camp seems to be the Occupy movement, right? Like they want to scapegoat Wall Street and the bankers and the corporations, right? And then you have the Tea Party's kind of morphed into Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and they want to vilify and scapegoat Muslims and Mexicans, and you know what I mean? Like it depends on who you want to scapegoat. Or they want to scapegoat China selling us products from overseas, so we need a high tariff to stop them, right? So it's really about who you decide to scapegoat. But I think you can trace a lot of that back to that original origin of Ron Paul's movement. And he wasn't always worried about things, but he was saying things that no one else was saying, and got a fairly significant, an animated following after himself, even though it wasn't big enough. But there's still like this kernel of libertarian, and Rand Paul tried to capture that. He tried to walk two lines.
Right.
He was trying to do libertarian light, and so it kind of pissed off both sides, and it never really caught on. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and again, it's not like, I don't personally identify as like a libertarian, but I definitely have a libertarian streak. Government should just leave me alone, and if left to the fruits of my own labor and doing what's best for me in my mind, I'm going to be better off, and so will everybody else if the government just kind of steps back and doesn't try to play such a role in our work life, our social lives, everything else. People should be left to their own devices. I didn't agree with everything that Ron had to say. I don't advocate a return to like the gold standard. I just don't. The free availability of credit, while it has become a negative, certainly was a positive in terms of post World War II America. So and again, but you're right. You're saying a lot of things that you weren't hearing from other candidates, and some of it was actually not really revolutionary. It was kind of a return to many things that this country was founded upon, which then ties itself to that Tea Party movement. But I was a little sad though that out of that, even if Trump does represent kind of that next the manifesto of the Tea Party movement, that like so much can be forgotten in such a short period of time in terms of what I thought Ron said that resonated with such a big part of the population.
Well, for some reason, humans, we have this hive-like aspect to our nature, like bees. it's that mob mentality.
Yep.
And there might be a few people that started it, and they're the energy behind it, and people just kind of follow along without really thinking about it or without really absorbing the reasons and the principles and the cause and effect. And then when that dissipates, they go on to the next thing, right? And,
right.
A lot of people, to them, picking the winner is so important. It doesn't matter what their principles are, right? Like, you don't want to be a loser, right? You want to be a winner. Don't you want to be a winner?
Well, if you look at my voting record at the State House, apparently not. So.
But some people, that's really, that whole electability issue is the key thing, and not so much about what they stand for. I don't know, it's human nature. I hope it comes back around again.
Well, that's my fear, is that I thought very healthy libertarian streak that, and I even had friends that were on the Democrat side that really connected with what Ron had to say, because he just kind of got himself outside of that partisan nonsense. I mean, how many times a day do you get emails from the New Hampshire GOP calling out Maggie Hassan because she took a limo to the airport, or some
right.
Like, no one cares. Like,
right.
Like, they act like, oh, look at her being wasteful, and then, like, as soon as a Republican comes to power, they do the same crap,
right.
and then you just get it from the Democrat Party rather than.
Yeah.
It's nonsense. Even in this battle over the next Supreme Court justice,
right?
You can't get an honest answer out of anybody at the top from either party.
Both sides rely on the Constitution to support their side, but they're on opposite sides, right?
Yeah, no,
yeah.
And it's a complete shift from the exact same situation that we faced when Reagan was in the last year of his presidency, and obviously it was Justice Kennedy was the result of that nomination. But Kennedy was nominated, prior to last year. It's hard for me even to weigh into this argument, because I'm almost kind of like, I'm trying to find like what the real argument is. I mean, Obama's still the president,
yeah.
So if it was a Republican president, would I want the Republican to go and nominate? Absolutely, because that would be closer to the things I want to protect.
Well, it's sort of, the founders intended there to be division of power, and each side is going to jealously guard their power. And in that struggle between the two sides, this is what we get, right? So the Democrats say the Constitution says the president appoints the Supreme Court justice, right?
Right.
But it also says that the Senate has to nominate
With the input from the Senate, or whatever.
The Senate has to confirm the nomination, right? So
it doesn't actually say confirm. The exact language, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but it basically says something to the effect of the president will appoint the Supreme Court justice, but it's like with, I forget the word,
advice and consent or something.
Yeah, advice and I think it's advice or something that basically connotates input. It doesn't say, like, there's no term confirming.
Okay.
And obviously you have to go back to legislative intent of the drafters and so on and so forth. But it's not as clear cut, like in terms of, the president puts forth this name and it has to be confirmed.
Well, if the Senate gets input, that means their voice matters.
Well, then you also have if the Senate's on recess. So so after Justice Scalia died, there was a week in which the Senate was already on recess when this happened. So if the president didn't want to play politics, and if I had been president, I probably would have gone ahead and just made my appointment at that point in time.
Huh.
It's a recess appointment. It can happen. Both bodies of Congress were out of D.C., and that was his window. But they want to make it like a divisive issue. And
well, they use it for fundraising.
oh God,
send us your money because this is going to happen.
Yeah,
there has to be conflict. Look at how they used Obamacare as a fundraising tool. Like, we have to stop Obamacare.
And how demeaning is that? How demeaning is that? The same people sending out those emails then go and support the extension of Obamacare here in the state. So you're awarded the House in New Hampshire, you're awarded the Senate at the federal level, and then the one thing that they were campaigning like crazy against was Obamacare, and then you go ahead and have our colleagues up there passing Medicaid expansion, which is enabled and a part of the Affordable Care Act. And that actually got passed today, and it's going to be rushed by the governor in terms of signing. So you've heard me rail against Medicaid expansion on numerous occasions on this program. And like any place that I have a pulpit or a microphone to do so, I mean, when it comes down to it, we're prioritizing free health coverage for folks that are childless adults of prime working age, 19 to 65. And when you start taking away from the limited resources that we have, the limited funds that our taxpayers have,
Yeah.
to fund those in need, and I'm not I don't say, oh, we can't help people. I think there is some duty to help out our fellow citizens, but we have to do it responsibly.
But it's funded through taxation, which is not voluntary.
Right. Well, that's a whole nother argument, in and of itself. But here we have a situation which, if you're sick, if you're old, or if you're a child, we already have programs that cover you, and that's part of I think really the message that's been getting out makes people feel like, oh, I want to support Medicaid expansion because these people are in need. Well, we already have these buckets, of assistance that we have. Number one. Number two, if you're already impoverished, you're already covered up to 100% of the poverty line. But this takes it from 100 to 138%. So basically it covers like part-time workers or people that have some forms of income coming in. But again, overall, they're not disabled and they can work. And I'm thinking to myself, well, geez, even if I wanted to go ahead and identify this program as a hand up, okay, rather than a handout, okay, and some Republicans have classified it as that, and that's why they voted for it. Well, the restrictions in terms of applicability are so harsh in terms of once you get to 139% of the poverty line, you're immediately cut off. So let's say I have a family of 4, okay, and my health care would cost, let's say, $1,200 a month. Medicaid expansion comes in, I fall in that 100 to 138% gap. Well, geez, now that's great, thanks for the assistance, but then I go out and I get a job, all right? And who knows what the job entails, but maybe it doesn't have coverage for my whole family. So I get coverage for my person, myself, but not my 2 kids and my wife. Now I have to make an actual decision, do I want to take that job?
Yeah, because there's some arbitrary line that the bureaucrats decided, and it disincentivizes you to advance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though I want to work, and there are a lot of people that are going to be on this program that want to work, I'm not saying that everyone on this program is a freeloader. I'm not saying that at all. But now we're putting up a fence around these people and trying to keep them in this dependent state. Because not only do you get cut off on the health coverage, but you start making, I think it's 145%, you lose your food stamps. So all these programs that are put in place that don't have a taper, and I think the lack of a taper is done on purpose.
So we should keep raising that 138. We should make it 150, 200.
Well, that's what they're going to. That's what
right.
I think the people behind the scenes, the lobbyists, and so on and so forth. I think that's what they want to do.
Right.
Because the more free flow of government money and taxation,
right.
the more the goodie bag is for the lobbyists and the cronies.
It really is creeping socialism. I mean, this first it's for certain groups, and then it gets expanded, and as it expands, it collapses the market. So the market, the private price the price for private insurance gets higher and higher.
Yep.
So more and more people can't reach it. So government has, and it's this endless cycle where socialism just expands. And not only do you have constituency groups created that vote to keep it and to grow it, but now you have these bureaucracies and lobbyists and like you said, the people getting the benefits from the gravy train, they fight to keep it and to grow it. So it's, we're kind of in a downward spiral, I think, just overall. We've lost faith that free markets create prosperity. Most people think that government is what creates prosperity. It seems like it. I don't know if most, but it seems like there's more and more people thinking that government is the thing that creates prosperity, and the bigger it gets, the more money we give it, the more prosperous we'll be. And I don't see how history has ever proven that accurate.
No, I mean, it hasn't. And I mean, if you take a look at the forms of government that have run amok with these types of programs, they usually end up with the wealthy getting extraordinarily wealthy. I mean, right. If you take a look at even communist Russia, okay, in terms of who held the power at that point in time, the aristocrats and the oligarchs, the old money just got wealthier and wealthier and wealthier because all the corruption that takes place in those systems. And the politicians get enormously and fabulously wealthy as well. I mean,
yeah. That never happens in the U.S.
It obviously it does, but to a much lesser extent.
How many millions is Obama worth now? There was some news article. He's buying some mansion in Hawaii for $7 million or something. How much does the president make a year?
It's insane. It's
Where does
insane.
that come from?
But the one thing I'll say again, I've been watching this program before. I do have a little bit of love for Bernie. That comes out every once in a while. Bernie is only worth about $450,000. When you consider how long he's been in politics, that, my friend, is not a corrupt individual. Like, I'm sorry, but like, to have amassed that amount of money in comparison to his extraordinarily wealthy counterparts. So John McCain's worth like $7 million. And I mean, when you're in there that long, you know, they're not making great business decisions. There's all sorts of stuff that gets funneled in their direction. That's little payoffs for things that they've done, favors they've done. But I will give Bernie credit that he's been, in my eyes, he passes the smell test for someone that's kept it clean during his time up in D.C.
Okay.
I don't agree with him in terms of taking all my money and redistributing it to everybody else for everything I've worked for. He's not really encouraging other people, I think, to get out there and work for that hard-earned dollar. But there are a couple things. He's also a non-interventionist, which speaks to me, because I you know, part of our huge budget goes to just military spending. You know, someone asked me the other day, because I was having a debate about taxation with them and so on and so forth, and they said, well, geez, you know, I don't mind like 35 or 30% of my paycheck, you know, going to pay for the firemen and the policemen and the schools and stuff like that. I said, whoa, time out. Like, you're not paying the state of they're Massachusetts residents, so unfortunately they're paying about like 6% income tax. But, you know, those taxes that you're paying to the state of Massachusetts and your property taxes go to those things that you value. All the lion's share, which goes down to the feds, you're seeing almost no value for what you're sending down there to be wasted. I mean, you think about that. So like, you know, I pay my property taxes, you pay your property taxes, and in New Hampshire, that's the vehicle with which we, you know, pay for our schools and most of these things. But, you know, so there's a defined value I can see and appreciate that I get from paying those taxes. But when I send my money down to the feds and the IRS, and you actually sit back and think about it, think about what you actually cherish that is a benefit bestowed upon you by the federal government. It's hard to come up with any. You know, my federal highways, I guess, you know, I do put some stock in feeling some level of security, you know, but I certainly don't, you know, like my money being used for, you know, huge defense contracts and getting involved in foreign conflicts that don't benefit you.
But the military keeps us safe, right?
I like a defensive military. I don't like an offensive military.
But you can't have freedom without a big military.
Well, you know, tell that to the founding fathers. They didn't even have a standing military for the first 20 some odd years of our existence. So
there wasn't. Yeah, there's not even like a standing army has to be. A standing army wasn't even in the Constitution.
Correct.
So every 2 years the budget has to be reapproved and.
But yeah, but it's just something for the viewers at home to chew on, because it does seem to, like, even when I was thinking about taxes and what I get from them, I always kind of lumped federal and state in together.
National defense is important, but there's a difference between national defense and being the policeman of the world.
Right.
And some people will say, you know, well, they keep the shipping lanes open and international commerce couldn't happen if we weren't everywhere all the time, you know, we being the U.S. Military. But I think there's we're $20 trillion in debt, and we spend, I think it's as much as the 8 next nations combined, we spend more than them on military spending. Like at some point, and it's not just military spending, there's, you know, welfare spending is also the other side of it. But the two parties kind of split it up, and as Rand Paul says, you know, they kind of make backroom deals. We'll spend more on domestic welfare, and you get to spend more on military, and it just keeps going up and up and up, and that's where you get $20 trillion debts from.
No, you know, it's you know, another source for people to be angry, I suppose. But you know, it's disheartening in terms of how you just see it continue and continue and continue. But you know,
cheer up, Bart.
Well, I'm trying to, you know, but it does get you down, because you wonder how the heck can this vicious cycle be stopped. And you know, I understand that there are people that want to do good. There's a lot of good voters out there that think with their vote, if they're voting for these programs and these expenditures, that, you know, they're promoting helping their fellow citizen. That's kind of their way of being charitable. You know, like we all pay in to the big pot that then is divvied up and then utilized to help out some of our fellow citizens and so on and so forth. But it's just the government's just so bad at it. I mean, just so incredibly inefficient and wasteful with it.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I try to put myself in other people's perspectives, and maybe I guess wrong, but here's one perspective that's not mine that I think I got right. You know, certain people think that government is the seat of everything, right? Like government, everything good flows from government. This is what it seems like to me. But in my mind, in a free society, you have lots of different institutions, all dynamically helping to create prosperity. You know, you have civic organizations, you know, you have churches, you have NGOs and charities and, you know, business associations and consumer groups, and you have all these different, and they're all funded voluntarily. They're not, like when you start funding things by forcing people to pay for things through taxation, that's when it collapses all those other voluntary things, and the society becomes less dynamic, less prosperous. So it's really just trying to see the rest of the picture, in my mind. You know, when people are free to act in their personal lives, with their economics and with their personal choices, society is a much more dynamic place. Problems are the solutions to problems that just kind of emerge from people naturally wanting to help each other. And that government isn't the solution to everything. Government has a defined purpose, and that is to protect people's rights. You know, that's really what it's there for. Not to solve every
I think
problem.
in the perfect world, that's what it's there for, is the protection of rights. But I think, unfortunately, you know, because government is of man, you know, it follows the same corruptions that man does, man or woman, people. That
women are just as corrupt as men.
Well, absolutely, but I look at it in terms of government. Once it really gets a foothold, it's almost like its entire purpose is to take more and more rights away from the people that empower it. You know, thanks for putting us here. You've made a wise decision, you know, giving me some authority or some control, but I don't trust your decision-making, voter, so now I have to work to take those rights and those freedoms away. And like, it's just a slow progression. And we also have this like, this need as government, and you see this every day up in Concord. Anytime something bad happens and the government feels like it's not heavily involved in that industry or that sector,
right.
Could be just one incident, and they're like, oh, that's because there's no regulation, and we need to jump in and immediately fix that.
And people get at the head of the parade, and they get on their press conferences, and they say, you know, I'm going to fix this, or we are going to fix this, and they kind of use it to like promote themselves.
Oh, the thing that sickens me the most, it's disgusting, and it's just disgusting political, you know, grandstanding. When we're talking about the Medicaid expansion fight, Jeb Bradley was on NHPR the other day, and he was sparring with Senator Sanborn, who was opposed to the bill. And Bradley's going on and on about how, like, you know, Senator Sanborn, you and your followers, it's irresponsible of you during this heroin crisis with people dying in the streets to be voting against Medicaid expansion. It's not drawing a connection between Medicaid expansion and this battle that we're in with this terrible drug. But yet, he just totally ignores the fact that Medicaid expansion has already been in place for 2 years. We were just reauthorizing it. And the last 2 years have been the absolute worst in terms of this epidemic. So I'm not going to argue that there's a correlation between Medicaid expansion and an increase in heroin usage.
No, there's not.
But I'm just going to go ahead and just absolutely shut down the notion that one has anything to do.
But politically, you could make a case and use it for your advantage that there is, and that's, you know, that was kind of, you can kind of see that coming down the road.
You look at that guy, and I don't know how many viewers are familiar with Senator Bradley, but you look at that guy, you just know he like, it's my own opinion. I don't want to project anything on you. I just get the feeling that like he's just one of those guys that just says stuff. He could care less about people ODing on heroin. Like, he's so far removed with all of his money and his, you know, outside.
I don't know him that well, but you know, there are people like that in politics. That's for sure.
But like, when you can be that disingenuous, and then use that as like the crutch for your cause, when like the numbers just don't support.
But you win that way.
Apparently, maybe I'm just really bad at this whole political thing, but like that gets me infuriated. I mean, I get really, really angry seeing that, and you know, you just see so many politicians. It's just like we see it, you know, too, when there's like a mass shooting or there's a terrorist attack. It's immediately, how can I go and utilize this to get votes from something that has nothing to do with the other?
Right.
And you know, that's why I do see, like, you know, as the parties get more and more extreme in terms of where they come down, and they kind of like, they pass out these pamphlets about, oh, these are our positions, you know, please espouse them, at least during campaign season. There is
like the party platform.
But there is an opportunity, I think, for you know, hopefully like a third party like that can work for the average American that's caught in the middle between this battle between these
Yeah. I mean, you look at the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire. You look at the platform that gets voted in, and the principles in the platform. They're pretty good principles. I like the party platform, but they don't follow it. It's like kind of a suggestion. But if we had another party, and it put up its principles, how are we going to get people to follow that? It seems to be the problem of.
Well, I do think that some of the positions that the parties take, because we only have two, are untenable in terms of their base. So like the one hand, you can't be on the Democrat side. Like I love the example of you can't be both an environmentalist and then like pro-union all the time.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? Because when you vote against things like the Keystone Pipeline, like you're alienating a significant portion of your labor base.
Right.
Because they rely on those good,
jobs,
high-paying union jobs. But then you're appeasing, the environmentalist faction that is trying to save the planet and so on and so forth. On the Republican side, you have this almost, I'd say, two completely diametrically opposed forces. Like say, we like limited government, we love to support business. But when they say we like to support business, they're really saying we like to support big business that donates to us. And limited government is just something that we throw the people to make them feel good, like, we're going to go in there and actually reduce things. But if you take a look at Republican presidencies and when we've been in control, like, we do nothing but grow the government as well. We just use different keywords and phrases, and we try to minimize those that actually stand up for limited government. But when we go and we give all sorts of concessions and change the laws for these massive corporations when they're not paying their fair share of, to use common nomenclature out there in the political arena.
Speak. It's called guilt speak, yeah.
But like when they're not, these billion-dollar corporations don't have to pay any taxes at all. Like I can see why people get really, really fired up and say, well, what the heck is going on with that? And you see these massive donations that come in the political world. Now I'm not against taking out, the ability to donate as much as you want to a candidate or a PAC, because I do think that is an expression of free speech. But I do completely hear my Democrat friends in terms of the abuses that come along with that freedom.
Well, the bigger the government grows, the more power it gains, the more people fight over the power, right? So the more, the bigger it grows, the more it intrudes in everyone's affairs, the more power it has, and it's all in DC, so that's where they go. They go to try to grab the lever of power every election cycle, and that's where the lobbying comes from.
But that's what brings me to my very small government-minded principles, is if you want to take the power away from the big bad corporations and the big bad lobbyists, give government less ability to make decisions for your life. That's what it comes down to, because it becomes a central control point for the 300 million people that live in this country. If you give the government less power, there's less stuff to be sold and bought.
If only we could stop feeding the beast. I don't know how we could do that, but it just seems to get bigger and bigger. How do we stop feeding it?
We stop. Well, we probably have to talk about how to stop it.
We got the timeout from the control room there.
But, so anyway, we didn't solve all the world's problems today, but we came pretty close. So
and we had a fun discussion, I thought.
We had a fun discussion. So I'm again Representative Bart Fromuth from Bedford. This is Keith Ammon from New Boston.
Awesome.
And you have
I have one thing I'd like to plug. So New Boston, we share a school district with you guys. Our middle and high school kids come here to Goffstown High School. And we've recently started a taxpayer association in town. And I'd like to encourage, if there's anybody in Goffstown who would like to do the same, we would really like to help you get that off the ground. I think there have been previous efforts and they've kind of come and gone. But if you go to nbtax.info, you can contact the chair of that association, Caleb Jacob, and we're doing a lot of cool stuff in New Boston as far as advocacy for the taxpayer, trying to keep a good balance between wants and needs in local government.
So, all right, well, please check out the website. Next week, John Burt will be back, so you won't have to listen to any more of our musings, at least for a time. But thank you for having us, and we'll see you later.